This is Before the Pitch, where you can love New York baseball no matter what shade of blue you are wearing. And I am Scott, and today we have a first-time guest who I am very excited to introduce. But before I get there, everyone who here works at Before the Pitch and everyone who has ever been involved at Before the Pitch is a youth educator in some way, which is why we feel it's very important that our content is giving family-friendly information with an educational value. And today is actually going to be a history lesson that you could sit down with your kids and you could add to the homeschooling lessons that I'm sure they are getting. But don't worry, this will be more fun than their history class. So the gentleman I'm about to introduce is a graduate from the Emerson College School of Journalism and former reporter for CPTV, the Boston Globe, and Nesson. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the talented and very intellectual Mr. Tyler Solomon.
Well, thank you for that intro, Scott. Really appreciate it. Great to be on the show.
Hey, great for you to come on here. I was really excited to have you on here. So this conversation is actually coming as an extension of a conversation that you and I actually had over a social distance Chick-fil-A lunch. This video is not sponsored, but we would like to be.
Call us, Chick-fil-A. We're all for it.
We are, and I will eat a spicy chicken deluxe on air
Yep,
every week if they
absolutely.
sponsor us. Uh, it is quite delicious. Um, so what this comes from is you actually did some research and you actually have a paper about the specific topic. Is titled something along the lines of the sports relocations that were most important to sports. So tell us about this publication that you had written.
Yeah, so I actually wrote it senior year of college for me because sports has always been an interest of mine. And the purpose of the paper was to talk about the relocation of professional sports franchises in multiple different sports, Major League Baseball, NHL, the National Football League, just to name a couple of ones that I focused on for my paper. But baseball has always been a passion of mine. And so for myself, I really wanted to focus on the relocation of the Dodgers and the Giants in the 1950s, because that in many ways shaped the relocation for other professional sports franchises in other leagues. It was that dramatic and groundbreaking that it really set the tone for where sports franchises could go.
So if you could quickly sum it up before we get into the actual details, and yeah, we're going to give a full history lesson on this whole thing from the event's start to finish, and hoping that you guys and of course all of your kids can have a wonderful understanding of such an event. But to summarize really quick, why would you say of all the baseball relocations that have ever happened, why would you quickly say this is the most important out of all of them?
So I would say that this is the most important out of all of them because you had two iconic franchises in New York. Arguably, some of the greatest baseball in sports history took place between 1947 and 1957. And in that universe, you had three New York sports teams: the New York Giants, Dodgers, and the Yankees. And if you look at the World Series teams that were playing during those times, it was a continuous rotation between the Yankees, Dodgers, and Giants, and at least one of those teams being in the World Series. And in fact, between 1954 and 1956, you had each of the New York teams, with the Giants winning in 54, the Dodgers winning in 55, and the Yankees winning again in 1956, that you had a New York sports team winning the World Series in 3 straight years, 3 different teams. That's the only time that something like that has ever happened. So with that shift, having had those 3 teams each win a World Series within 3 years, to then by the 1958 season, New York to only be left with 1 team, that's a seismic shift in the world of sports.
So these events you have described to me, as you said, would be worthy of a Mad Men-like TV show
Yes.
about the relationship of all the people who were involved and the people who we are about to meet who are in this story. Now, anyone who even follows baseball right now knows that big changes and big decisions do not just happen really quickly. This is a long sequence of events that we are going to be exploring. I don't know where to start. So Tyler, where does this story start?
So this story actually first starts back in the early 1900s, where two of the first Major League Baseball teams actually relocated to become very different franchises. The first team to relocate was the what was known as the Milwaukee Brewers. Actually moved to become the St. Louis Browns. That was the first relocation of a Major League Baseball team. And then the second team was the Baltimore Orioles to relocate to become the New York Highlanders, which, if we're New York sports fans, know that the Baltimore Orioles ultimately became the Highlanders, and the Highlanders became the New York Yankees. So those were the first two major changes that happened. Now, 50 years go by, and there are no changes within the teams in Major League Baseball. There's 16 teams, 8 in the National League, 8 in the American League. That's how it is for over 50 years. And then the Boston Braves broke that. They started going west. And so in the 1953 season, they moved from Boston to Milwaukee to become the Milwaukee Braves. That was the first team to start moving west. And they moved because Milwaukee had been campaigning to get a Major League Baseball team for the longest time, and they gave them incentives. One of the key things that I found during a lot of research in many different cases is that cities that want professional sports, that maybe have had minor league sports for a number of years, but they want that professional sports teams, they're offering these teams significant tax breaks. They are drumming up excitement. They're providing public funding for stadiums. And these are all multi-million dollar presence that these cities are offering these teams to lure them here. And it's business. It's a business move at the end of the day. Not even touching on the fact that the sports fans who are involved with any team relocation is very devastating. But I digress. The 1950s is when we start seeing teams moving back. So Braves moved to Milwaukee. The St. Louis Browns moved to Baltimore, become the Baltimore Orioles again. They hadn't had a team in over the 50 years since the Highlanders left. New York, as I mentioned, is becoming the epicenter for this. And there's no question that when the Braves left Boston, they were the second team in town. When the Browns left St. Louis, they were the second team in town. The Cardinals were the fan favorite. The Red Sox were the fan favorites in there. The Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees were fan favorites across the boroughs. There was no question about that. The Bronx Bombers, the Giants in Manhattan, and then the Bums of Brooklyn. Everyone loved them, despite how much there was issues. Walter O'Malley, in Brooklyn Dodgers fans' lore, is the devil. In LA Dodgers lore, he's considered the godsend. Walter O'Malley takes over operations for the Dodgers in the mid-50s. He sees a problem, and the problem is this. The devoted fans that were in New York City for as number of years as they were are now migrating out to Long Island. They're leaving the cities for the suburbs. Families are growing out there. You have more of these suburban areas. And in New York, you're not having those same families that are walking to the ballpark anymore because the car is becoming their key means of transportation. They're not taking the subway, they're driving to where they're going. So in the 1950s, this is a huge shift for America. You've got the economic growth that came from post-World War II. The economy is growing. The baby boom is in full swing right now. So families are expanding. Prosperity is good. So people are going out of these city centers where they had been for decades, out to the suburbs to own their little piece of heaven. O'Malley sees this. And O'Malley looks at Ebbets Field and realizes that this is not the ballpark to maintain those same fans that were dedicated Dodgers fans all through the 40s, all through the 50s. They're changing. So he wants to build a new stadium. This is where the story gets interesting.
Now, question before we keep going: is there anything particularly wrong with Ebbets Field at the time?
Ebbets Field, and O'Malley actually described this perfectly in a meeting that he had with the New York City mayor. Ebbets Field was built in the early 1900s. By 1955, it's a 55-year-old ballpark. One of the big concerns with Ebbets Field, again, as I mentioned with the car, it only has 100 parking spaces. That's nothing. Very few people are taking the public transport anymore because the trolley cars are shutting down in Brooklyn. So it's making harder for people to get into the ballpark. So what O'Malley realizes is that Ebbets Field has just become outdated. There's no amount of renovation that can take place to make this stadium feel modern. They need to build a new stadium from the ground up, and they need to find it, and they need to build it in an area where they have more land to grow.
Now, when you say trolleys is just a quick thing to note for any kids watching. Trolleys are connected to where the name Dodgers comes from.
That's
Believe
right.
it or not, we'll let you guys look that up for yourselves. That's a fun thing. Continue from where you left off,
Sure.
please.
So O'Malley is searching through Brooklyn, and he actually comes across this area, which is very interesting to a point I'll mention later on. That is ideal situation. It's the old meatpacking district within Brooklyn, and the reason why he likes this area is because it is the terminus for the Long Island Railroad. So all of the trains, all the subways are merging into this one area, so that way if people wanted to take the subway or take the train from Long Island to see their Dodgers, like they did as kids and bringing their kids, it's a central location where they can build a brand new stadium. And an interesting fact is that Walter O'Malley wanted to build the first domed stadium in Major League Baseball. The renderings that he had would have made the Dodgers have the first dome stadium because O'Malley never liked rainouts because he lost money. So he wanted to have a dome stadium because in the Northeast, you never know what the weather's going to be like. But a dome stadium would solve his revenue problems because they could always play no matter what. So things seem to be going well for O'Malley. He has this perfect plot of land in Brooklyn. He's prepared to fund the stadium. All he needs is for the city of New York to claim the land by eminent domain, and then he can get the land and build a stadium. It seems like a very straightforward deal. There's one person in his way. That's a gentleman by the name of Robert Moses. Now, if you look at today, any of the major highways, any of the major bridges connecting the various boroughs of New York, if you look at some of the buildings that were made, Robert Moses was considered the architect of what the modern New York City is. You could not build a bridge in the 1950s or 60s or a road or a building without going through Robert Moses. He had so much power and so much influence in New York City that most people would just not even bother fighting him when it came to any kind of conflicts they had. So O'Malley goes to Moses. I'm looking for this land. This is our spot. We are paying for the stadium in full. We just need you to give us the land. Moses says no. He doesn't like that spot for the stadium. He wants the Dodgers to build the stadium in Flushing Meadows in Queens, the site of the old World's Fair location. O'Malley says no. His argument is that the Brooklyn Dodgers must be in Brooklyn. They have been in Brooklyn since the 1800s. They will be in Brooklyn to the end. we need your help to get this land. Moses doesn't really put up a fight. He says no. O'Malley appeals with over 15 letters to Moses's office, expressing his reason and concern why the Dodgers can no longer be in Ebbets Field, that this is a hazard. There's no reason for us to continue to be here. We need to get the stadium built. We need to get this done. And Moses continues to ignore his requests. So by this point, we're in 1956, and O'Malley is getting very frustrated. Mind you, the Dodgers had just won the World Series in 55. He thought that with that, saying, look, this is Brooklyn's team. The fans deserve, the borough of Brooklyn deserves the proper stadium for the Dodgers. Still nothing.
Now, what's Moses' reasoning for not wanting that new ballpark in Brooklyn and wanting it in Flushing Meadows?
He wanted the ballpark in Flushing Meadows because that was going to be the epicenter for what was being planned for the 1964-65 World's Fair. He knew that was going to be there. He was already working on that planning because World's Fair takes several years to actually plan and build and get all the proper zoning together. He wanted it there. He wanted to have it tied to the New York World's Fair. That's what he wanted. Didn't happen. But it did happen in some regard, which we'll talk about a little later.
If anyone's a fan of a certain ball club, you might start to see a few familiar-sounding descriptions, which get really interesting. And if you're a Marvel fan, you'll notice that actually Stark Expo is actually kind of based off of this idea of like the World's Fair and where all the stuff's coming from. Watch Iron Man 2, and then if you keep watching all the Marvel movies, you'll see the callbacks to the old Stark Expo. That's really what's actually pointing at. And there's a lot of visual similarities too. If you've seen pictures of the World's Fair, and if you see pictures like the overhead shots of a Stark Expo, a lot of visual similarities, which is really cool. So that's just a little fun little thing for everybody else.
So O'Malley's frustrated, and the Los Angeles City Council gets wind of this. Now, Los Angeles at the time has only had ball clubs from the Pacific Coast League, like these Los Angeles Angels of the Pacific Coast League. Minor league ball, not actual professional baseball, but they are trying to get a team in one way or the other. LA is courting a couple of different teams. The first team that they're courting is the Dodgers. They want the Dodgers. O'Malley at first is brushing them away, being like, okay, I'm not interested in you. I'm trying to get a deal with Brooklyn. The 1956 World Series is happening. O'Malley is in his box, watching his Dodgers play the Yankees. He looks down a couple of rows, and he actually sees the owner of the then Washington Senators, Calvin Griffith, talking to one of the main liaisons of the Los Angeles Council. He's curious. What are they talking about? Why is he talking with Los Angeles? He wants to know. Based on a documentary that I had seen about this, he writes down a note, gives it to the usher, gives it to the woman from Los Angeles. The note says, "Don't do anything until you talk to me." And then the World Series plays out. So O'Malley expresses his frustration, saying, "I've been trying to get a deal done in Brooklyn. It's not happening. I need to figure out a place for the team to really go, because Ebbets Field does not work anymore." A lot of it came down to the structural issues with Ebbets Field. It would probably have lasted another 5 years at most, at which point it would have needed to get destroyed or completely rebuilt from the ground up. So O'Malley works. The LA City Council gives him a sweetheart deal where he can pick whatever land he wants to build his stadium, public funding options, tax breaks, the works. He's got a great package deal. What he does, he turns that around, tells the mayor of New York, we are going to leave to Los Angeles unless we get a deal done in Brooklyn. This causes the mayor of New York much panic. He calls a meeting together with Moses, who's been O'Malley's biggest thorn in the side, O'Malley, and himself. The meeting takes place. Meeting lasts for allegedly 2 to 3 hours, in which O'Malley expresses all of his frustrations that's been happening. Moses is there, and he is just furious. He is a person who does not want to be summoned because somebody doesn't like his decision. So he, again, puts his foot down for a final time and says, what you're saying is that unless we give you this specific parcel of land, you in fact are going to move the Dodgers to Los Angeles. And he says yes. And so Moses calls his bluff. He says, you're not going to do it. The 56 World Series ends, the Dodgers lose. The Dodgers are in an interesting position because they've already now submitted an appeal to Major League Baseball to relocate them to the West Coast. O'Malley's done with New York. He can't get his ballpark. LA can give him more or less his equivalent to a ballpark out in LA. Major League Baseball won't approve it because there isn't another team in California. The closest team was in St. Louis. O'Malley can't go to Los Angeles alone. He needs another team in California. This is where the story takes the turn. Because while this is happening with the Dodgers and Giants and the Dodgers and the Yankees in the World Series, what has changed but the lonely New York Giants? So after their 1954 World Series win, the Giants hit a string of abysmal playing years, which is crazy because you had stars like Willie Mays patrolling center field and being one of the best players of all time, and yet the Giants are nearly dead last in the National League for 3 straight years. The owner of the Giants, his name is Horace Stoneham. He was a very different kind of owner in which he actually was one of the few owners that didn't have other business ventures. His business venture was the team. So in terms of wealth, the Giants were his only source of income. So 3 very bad playing seasons from a financial standpoint in ticket sales, they're hurting him. They're bleeding him dry. The Polo Grounds is running to the same issue that Ebbets Field has. It's old, it's dilapidated. It needs millions of dollars to renovate, and the city doesn't want to give it to them. But they didn't raise as much of an issue to it as the Dodgers did. Horace had actually been working with Minneapolis for about 2 years to try and move the Giants to Minneapolis. And the reason for that is because Minneapolis was home of the lead minor league affiliate for the New York Giants. So per the Major League Baseball contract, a team could relocate to the market of their primary prospect team. That was allowed within there. So Horace has 1 foot out the door. Minneapolis wants a team. They're going to give him what he wants. It's a good deal for him. O'Malley had an okay relationship with Horace. The owners association, the Major League Baseball owners, it's a fraternity. So everybody knows each other, but particularly the ones in New York, they really know each other well because they're all close. He gets wind that Horace is going to leave or wants to leave. He's got the deal with Los Angeles, and he puts him in contact with the parties in San Francisco. Because at one point, San Francisco could have been a landing location for the Dodgers. It wasn't. O'Malley always wanted LA after he couldn't get what he wanted in Brooklyn. So he puts him in contact with the folks in San Francisco, and they offer him a deal that is just beyond amazing. Better than what Minneapolis was going to offer him. So here we are, going towards the end of the Major League Baseball season. The Giants they're not doing well. This is not the 57 season for the Giants is not good. The Giants were the first to announce on August 19th of 1957 that they would not be continuing to play in New York. They were going to move to San Francisco. That was signed off by the Owners Association and Major League Baseball. And the Dodgers followed suit on early October of 57. It was the end of the season when the Dodgers fell out of playoff contention that they officially announced that they were moving to Los Angeles. And it was only because those two teams left for California together is why Major League Baseball approved the move for it. But really, O'Malley was the mastermind behind this. Because if he didn't get Horace to change his mind from going from Minneapolis to San Francisco, he would have been stuck in Brooklyn for another several years because Major League Baseball would not approve him to move unless there was another team in California. Because of his vendetta with Robert Moses for not giving him the land that he wants, not only did he take the Dodgers, which were a much more profitable franchise than the Giants, not as profitable as the Yankees, but still very profitable at the time. He takes the Dodgers, and the Giants follow with him as well. So by the end of 1957, New York City, which had its pinnacle years less than a decade before, is left with one team, two abandoned ballparks, and a fan base that is shattered. From that moment forward, it's a complete shift in both the Dodgers and Giants franchises when they relocate. Not only are they building state-of-the-art ballparks for the 1960s when they're there, the Giants actually played their first two seasons in Steel Stadium, home of the San Francisco Steels of the Pacific Coast League. But ironically, the minor league team that Joe DiMaggio played for before he came to the Yankees.
Beat me to that punch. I was just about to bring that up.
Yep. And the Dodgers played at the LA Coliseum, so home of the Olympics, for two seasons until Dodger Stadium was built. So that was,
and correct me if I'm wrong, that is the Dodger Stadium that still exists today.
That is still the Dodger Stadium that is still there today. When O'Malley was looking for his ideal location, he went up in a bubble helicopter surveying land and found this portion of Chavez Ravine that had merging intersections because Los Angeles was one of the early adopters of the highway in the 1950s and 60s. He found the perfect point where these major sections of highway were coming together within Chavez Ravine, and that's where he placed his ballpark. None of the design elements from his domed stadium came with him. for a number of years, it was rumored that the domed model still existed within the Dodgers archives, but nobody's been able to confirm it. But there are photographs that it did in fact exist, and that you can see how the Dome Stadium would have looked in Brooklyn. But yeah, that shift led to, over the next decade, another 7 Major League Baseball teams relocating to various cities and continuing to move to various cities out west. That's not including expansion teams that are happening that are kind of filling some holes as you go through, because the 1950s and 60s, you also see a major expansion within Major League Baseball of adding new teams, including the official Los Angeles Angels in 1961. You then also see the relocation of the Athletics, both from Philadelphia and then from Philadelphia to Kansas City, and then from Kansas City to Oakland. You see 3 moves there. The Braves move again. You then also see the moving of the Seattle Pilots, the defunct baseball team that lasted a year, moved to become the Milwaukee Brewers, and then 7 years later had the Seattle Mariners come through. So that was interesting. But that core.
And Minneapolis does get their team. Minneapolis does get their team.
Minneapolis gets their team, ironically, from Calvin Griffith, who was talking to the LA City Council to move there. So then they get the team, and then DC gets an expansion team, which then leaves again to become the Texas Rangers. And then DC doesn't get a professional baseball team for over 30 years until the Expos move to DC. So the reason why the Dodgers and the Giants were such a critical point in terms of those relocations was this. You had 2 powerhouse and recognizable teams, particularly the Dodgers, that uprooted from a fan base that had been established there for over 50 years, rip up more or less overnight, relocate to Los Angeles, and that's it. The team and the city would eventually get another National League team 5 years later. But keep that in mind, having 3 Major League Baseball teams in New York for over 50 years to then go down to 1 for 5 straight years with 2 abandoned ballparks, that's a huge blow from the city. The mayor was devastated. Moses was not as impacted because that expansion team we know as the New York Metropolitans, the Mets, and Moses got his wish for building a stadium in Flushing Meadows at the site of the New York World's Fair, which became Shea Stadium.
And even crazier, Citi Field comes along, and taking it full circle, it looks exactly like Ebbets Field, to take that full circle. For a lot of kids who are listening to this, the New York Mets, and I joke about this a lot, they're the I Hate the Yankees fan club. And I hope you guys see actual reason for that. Is because once these 2 teams left, 2/3 of New York baseball fans do not like the Yankees. That's also not to be underestimated. None of these 2 teams like the Yankees, and these 3 teams, their fan bases, hate each other with a burning passion. So that's not even helpful for the Yankees, the fact that only 1/3 of the city is even rooting for them. A lot of people in Connecticut, believe it or not, who were Dodgers fans actually turned to be Red Sox fans, because you couldn't root for the Yankees at that point. Someone who you and I actually know, I won't drop his name, but the chairman of the Little League that you and I played in was actually a Brooklyn Dodgers fan, and that's why he turned to a Sox fan. He said, I was just so heartbroken I couldn't get myself to root for the Yankees. That was actually a very common thing. But not only is that stadium built, the New York Mets even adopt the New York Giants hat, first of all, and their logo.
Well, and so that's the interesting thing as well. So there was a lawyer who actually fought for New York to get that expansion team. His last name was Shea. Hence why Shea Stadium was actually named, because the lawyer who actually got the expansion National League franchise from Major League Baseball, his last name was Shea, so that's where Shea Stadium came from. What is interesting is the reason why they went for that blue and orange colors was because of the fact that it actually laid tribute to both the Dodgers and the Giants, having been the predecessor National League teams to New York. The Major League Baseball, when the Mets were coming to fruition and they were working on a logo, the city of New York had the rights to the NY that the Giants used for a number of years in that orange. And ironically, of all of the team owners that voted to approve it, including Walter O'Malley, the one owner who did not like it was Horace, who moved the team from New York. So, not surprising, the Giants didn't like the use of their old logo, even though they had already moved to San Francisco. And then the blue obviously being for Dodger blue. So that's how we got that kind of mix of the white, blue, and orange for
And the pinstripes come from the Yankees.
exactly.
So now here's a copyright question. Do the San Francisco Giants today, I don't know if you know this, do they have the rights to print that the NY in something that says Giants?
So it is a bit of copyright is a very tricky situation. And they do have some rights to it in regard to if they're celebrating specific team milestones, because the team history continued with them to San Francisco. So I'll use an example of the Baltimore Colts national football team. When they moved, and that's a story for a whole nother time, when they moved from Baltimore to Indianapolis, they took the naming and the team history rights with them. So Baltimore could not name another team the Colts, which was could not name a national professional football team the Colts. Couldn't do that. They took all those naming rights with them because the city didn't secure it. New York, the same thing kind of happened because the Giants' legacy just shifted to San Francisco. They have the rights to the history of the New York Giants, and the logo of the Mets is actually slightly altered. It's slightly altered from the New York Giants logo. It's nearly identical, but there's a couple of things that they had to change on it in order for it to be unique to the Mets and for the Giants to still have their logo rights to the old New York Giants logo. But more or less, it's about 95% the same.
And for anyone wondering, yes, the opposite could happen where you do not take your rights with you. As an example of that would be the Cleveland Browns and the
Yes.
Baltimore Ravens. Because when the Cleveland Browns, a lot of people don't know that, actually succeed right now as the Baltimore Ravens, and the Ravens just told Cleveland, no, we don't even want that.
Yep.
Which is pretty funny. But a lot of people don't know the current Cleveland Browns are not the Cleveland Browns. However, the Ravens just kind of let them have the history for it. So that's a weird thing. But yeah, for anyone wondering, the opposite could happen. You could do either one.
And what is interesting in terms of a more recent example is that the Washington Nationals do have some of the history rights to the Montreal Expos, but the city actually has the naming and logo rights of the Montreal Expos with them, including their mascot, Yuppie, which is interesting.
Here, what's really interesting is I've actually been. Have you been in that park yet?
No, I haven't. That's on my
Um,
list.
in front in the front, Billy and I actually both went with Road Trip Matt, who a lot of our viewers would recognize. There's kind of like this walkway and a sidewalk, and they have a couple statues, and then these little kind of like plaques. It's kind of like their own monument park, what I call it.
Yeah.
For outside have these plaques that actually tell in chronological order the history of the Montreal Expos all the way, and the Washington Senators. They have the both of them.
Yeah.
It showed the history of the Senators, the history of the Expos, and then it's really cool because as you read them, you're walking closer and closer to the door. So ultimately, the story ends
Yeah.
with where you are now at Nats Park, and they do have some statues guys up there. I know Walter Johnson was up there. I can't remember if any Expos were up there, but I do know Walter Johnson is one of the statues who is there, who is a senator, and um, he was not an expo, but they do have some expo stuff there. Even though it is majority senators.
Which makes sense, and the Washington Senators are a very unique franchise as well because of the fact that not only did they were one of the first teams to have that relocation. They relocated to Minneapolis to become the Twins. But Major League Baseball, the next season, granted them an expansion franchise, which is very rare. And about a decade later, that expansion franchise left to then become the Texas Rangers. So Washington had a very unique history with two teams with the Senators' names that just left. They still kept the team history with the city, but they didn't actually want to name the team the Senators again when the Expos were relocating. They wanted to make it the Nationals to make it a little bit more of a neutral name compared to the Senators, which is very political, obviously, in DC. And one of the interesting things is that the Nationals became one of the first teams since the New York Mets for when they first started in DC, while their Nats Park was being built, they played their games at RFK Stadium, which was the last stadium that the Washington Senators played in.
Ooh.
Subsequently, the New York Mets, for their first two seasons, played in the Polo Grounds, which is where the New York Giants last played as well. So the Nats became the first team to actually have played in the former team's stadium after the team had since left.
That's funny. So every New York team has played in the Polo Grounds at some point.
Yeah, it's true. And
Maybe not as a home field. Obviously, the Dodgers and the Yankees. I don't think the Yankees ever used it as a home field. I don't think so. No, even though it's actually, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Polo Grounds was like right across the river from Yankee Stadium. Am I correct?
it is. And so
Or
what is
was
interesting
anyway.
about that is that the Giants and the Yankees actually had shared ownership um, of the Polo Grounds for a number of years. In 1921, that's when there was a bit of a rift happening between Jacob Rupert, who is the owner of the Yankees, and I can't recall the name of the Giants owner at the time. But because of that feud is why Jacob Rupert built the stadium where it is today, because he wanted it to be in the backyard of the Polo Grounds, so that way people could see a beautiful new stadium across the river that they're going to go to compared to the old dumpy Polo Grounds.
Um, today, what's in the lot of the Polo Grounds or what it was, I believe it's like an apartment
Apartments.
complex, just some
Yeah.
small buildings. I am told there is a plaque there, and I have seen a picture that there is like a small little rock thing, like a rock plateau thing. You can kind of climb, and you could see that view that you were talking about. You could look directly at Yankee Stadium from across the river. And when you say the plot
There's some
that is Yankee Stadium, it's
stairs.
actually next door to where Yankee Stadium is currently. It's right.
Yeah.
I still say the same thing. People complain about it all the time. We actually have a video coming out later this week, or not, a little bit earlier next week, about people who complain about Yankee Stadium like that. But I'll save that surprise for later.
It's funny that you bring that up because there are still some remnants of these old ballparks that's within their area. So, for example, in Brooklyn, you would find a plaque marking the place of home plate. And ironically, apartments are built where Ebbets Field was as well. So you'll find an apartment building there where Ebbets Field once stood. You've got that same plaque where the Polo Grounds are. There's actually a staircase that used to be attached to the Polo Grounds that is still there that people can walk up to get to it's like this elevated sidewalk. So that's one of the last remaining physical structures that was still there from the Polo Grounds building. Um,
Shea Stadium also has a plaque at its home plate.
yep.
That is in a parking lot. I'm pretty sure is it in an actual parking space and there's a number for it. I want to say
That I'm not sure about though.
it's actually in a parking space. Billy would know because he's a Mets fan. He would know. Mets
And
fans, if you're listening, fact check that for me. But yeah, that home plate is actually still in the parking lot, and home plate for Yankee Stadium, I believe, is home plate on one of the little recreation fields
the
that they have
farthest
over there.
diamond, yeah. Yeah, the farthest diamond closest to where the old bat was.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's that home plate is. I think made it slightly off, so that way it's not exactly on the spot, but it's within the area of where the original one there is. The New York Giants home plate resides at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown, New York, for all
Oh,
the.
really?
Yep. So the original home plate that was from the very last game of the New York Giants playing, not the Mets playing, the Giants playing, is located at Doubleday Field in Cooperstown, New York. You'll also find in the Baseball Hall of Fame, that's where the cornerstone of Ebbets Field is to this day. They preserved the cornerstone of the ballpark, and it's there with the day that it was actually constructed. Um, Definitely always recommend to anybody who has not gone to explore the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's about a 3-hour drive or so from where we are in Connecticut. Um, but
Well worth the drive. It's a boring drive, but well worth the drive.
very boring drive. But if you really want to have a field day with just exploring proper baseball history for really not that much of a cost, all in favor, it's minimal dollars to get a full expression of baseball history, and they continue to expand it and grow all the time. And also a fun fact about it, which not many people realize, the National Baseball Hall of Fame is run by Major League Baseball. The museum, which a lot of people associate as being part of the Hall of Fame, is actually not the case.
Yeah,
So,
they actually have their own. Yeah, I know.
yep, because where all the plaques reside in that hall, that is run and controlled by Major League Baseball. The museum itself is publicly and privately funded through donations to keep baseball history alive on that side. So that is also why in the museum you will see artifacts, for example, from Pete Rose, who is banned from baseball but is still a part of baseball history. But you will not see any mention of him over on the actual Hall of Fame side, not because he's not a member, but because that is controlled by Major League Baseball.
And you can tell in the name, it's not the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, it's the National Baseball Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
You're going to find a lot of remnants there from the remember people, a league of their own, the
Yep.
women's league that was being played. There's a lot of cool stuff from there. Oh, guys, you got to go to Cooperstown. If you haven't gone, oh my God, you could spend a whole weekend there.
I drove up there randomly one weekend last year because it had been about 10 years since I had last been. Not a lot of it changes, but enough of it changes, and they continue to grow and add more interactive experiences as well. So one thing that they did have, which was very unique in kind of talking about where we are with the Brooklyn Dodgers, is they have a uh, virtual reality simulator of what it would look like standing on the pitcher's mound in at Ebbets Field and being able to look 360
Ooh,
around and what that peripheral view would look like for that stadium. And it was
wow.
truly amazing, especially being someone who really loves that decade of New York baseball and just the iconic figures that played there. Yeah, that I argue is the greatest decade of Major League Baseball. When you look at the stars that were playing in New York, not only the stars that were ending their careers, but were just getting their careers started, and the teams, the caliber of teams that were within the New York team, it was almost like Fantasyland. Like, you could have never imagined seeing all these incredible Hall of Fame legends playing within a couple of subway stops from each other.
Mm.
And so to see those two teams by the end of 1957 leave New York for the pastures of California, that was a wake-up call and a dramatic shift for Major League Baseball going forward.
Tyler Solomon, an absolute pleasure to have you on. Any last minute things you would like to plug before we end this episode?
So honestly, this is a very strange time right now for Major League Baseball. Not many people really know what's going to happen with the season. Are we going to have the season at all? Are we going to get, any kind of playing time? What I'd say to all the fans out there is, can still continue to support your teams. See if your local teams are doing any kind of charitable donations or connections to local healthcare facilities and local hospitals to support the first responders. But also take this time to really, learn more about your team. Take that next step to actually become, that next level of Dodger fan, Yankee fan, Red Sox fan. Because this is where you can really, there's so many great resources like Before the Pitch that's able to talk about this level of, not only baseball history, but just, where we are in sports currently. Take the time to really learn more about your team, because you'll be surprised at how much history there really is within your team's legacy that if you do a little digging, not too many people, will know. I also want to cite a fantastic documentary where it actually got me very interested about the Dodgers history, and that's called The Ghosts of Flatbush. It was an HBO documentary that was published back in the mid-2000s. It's on YouTube. Go check it out there. There's multiple parts on it. Great retrospective about the Dodgers history. Really kicking off with when Jackie Robinson broke the color barrier for Major League Baseball, leading all the way up to when the Dodgers left. So if you want to see more and learn more about that whole process of the Dodgers history, but also about that relocation, I highly recommend checking out that documentary.
Thank you very much, Tyler. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to have you on very, very soon. The more stuff you research, the more stuff you look up, the more conversations we can have, because you know me, I love a good baseball history lesson. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget to comment, subscribe, and like this video. Don't forget to share, especially share it with people with kids. Share it with your kids. Share it to your friends with kids. Share it to your Little League team and your Little League parents. There's so much here for your kids to learn, because baseball is such an important part of just American history in general. There's a reason why this topic specifically is cited in We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel multiple times. There's a lot of references to baseball there, especially about this specific topic about the move to California. It is a fantastic thing to have baseball around, and we are so looking forward to it coming back whenever it does come back, because we need it to come back. Because when America comes back, baseball comes back. So this is all we have for today. Thank you guys for watching Before the Pitch, and we talk baseball because we know ESPN isn't going to.